Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable, and the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why the Australia Institute is publishing our first book as part of our 30th anniversary celebrations. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia from leading thinkers such as Yanis Varoufakis, Auntie Pat Anderson, and Professor Peter Doherty. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to pre-order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Eleanor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our chief economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Eleanor.
How are we doing this week?
I'm doing a little bit better than I was doing last week.
Okay, that's good.
Surprisingly.
Had some time to process.
Yeah, processing, deep breaths, calming music.
Yep.
A nice Spotify playlist.
Well,
Listeners might realise that Eleanor and I often compare our Spotify playlists, and Eleanor
oh
has
yeah,
some
what
weird
the day
things,
list
and I
is
have
called.
sensible old fart
Old
music.
rock.
Yeah,
Yep.
old yacht
Yep.
rock.
And then mine just
It's
personally insults me.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Greg, we've talked a lot on the pod about how wages aren't keeping up with inflation and how cost of living is just in the toilet for everyone. We've talked a lot about how inflation's more or less sort of stabilized recently, but cost of living is still in the toilet. But something I'd like to talk a bit more about today is wages.
Wages growth has continued to ease, but still generally above rates consistent with inflation targets given the weak productivity growth. Right now, we believe that settings are restrictive and we need to keep rates restrictive for the time being.
Breaking news just in on wage growth over the September quarter.
It is the slowest annual rise that we've seen out since the December quarter in 2022. And that's exactly the sentiment that probably a lot of consumers are feeling.
It's what you wrote your column in The Guardian on this week. It's kind of the other part of the cost of living equation. How are wages doing at the moment? Are things looking up?
No.
Oh, okay.
Literally no, because, the latest wages price index figures came out, and essentially it's kind of in the name. We got the consumer price index, which is what we call inflation. We got the wages price index, which is essentially what's the average wages growth across the country, and we divide it into states and various things as well. But what we saw this week, the latest figures showed in the past year, wages rose on average 3.5%. So basically people's wage on average increased 3.5% in the past year, which sounds good, except that's actually a fall from the year to June, which was 4.1%. So it was a big drop. In fact, the biggest drop in a quarter since 2009. So we're talking 15 years. So and that happened due to the GFC.
Yeah.
So a really big drop and a real sort of pushback at all of those, especially at the Reserve Bank and other conservative economists and commentators who've been banging on worrying about a wage price spiral. The wages are going to go out of control. We've got to watch out for wages. Wages are actually slowing. The growth is slowing. 3.5% is pretty much kind of the target for decent wage rises along the lines with decent inflation. You kind of want inflation of about 2.5%. You add on 1% growth in productivity on average. 2.5 plus 1 equals 3.5. That's kind of what your wages should grow. So it's certainly not a case of we're seeing things going things going mad, I should say, of wages going out of control. It really is a sign that actually the Reserve Bank is running out of reasons not to cut rates, in my view. So
if the wage increase was 3.5%, and what was inflation?
Yeah, a lot lower. It was 2.8% listeners might remember we were talking about, and a big reason for that, we had the government energy rebates, which helped lower it. So CPI, that official inflation measure, 2.8%.
So that seems all right there.
Yeah. It seems all right. And you think, oh, great, real wages are growing. But here's the crucial thing. And if people are out there going, okay, how come it's the official figures are saying my wages are going up when I know I've got less money to spend than I did last year because prices and costs of things have risen? The reason is the official inflation rate, the CPI, does not count your mortgage repayments.
Oh.
Which is a fairly significant cost if you happen to have a mortgage. So you might think, oh, well, that's a complete crock. And
it seems like a bit of a huge gap in that equation.
And that's because inflation is not actually measuring cost of living. It's measuring inflation. But the Bureau of Statistics does have a measure that actually measures cost of living. It always comes out the week after the inflation figures. So it came out actually last week. And what they do is they split the economy up into household groups. They have employer households. They have people who are retired and on the age pension, people who are retired and, are that quote unquote,
self-funded retirees.
Self-funded retirees. Yes, thank you. Self-funded retirees. And they've got people who are living on government support, like if you're on job seeker or various disability support pension. Because what we know is, depending on if you've got a job, if you're retired, if you're on support, government support, affects what you buy things, affects how much of things you spend money on. So, for example, self-funded retirees spend a lot more of their income on recreation and travel than do people on government support. And in fact, people on employer households are more likely to spend money on education because they're generally the families who have got kids and things like that. Retirees, obviously, not so much. So what they do is they basically adjust the inflation figures for each family type. But crucially, in the inflation figures, those official CPI figures, they have a measure for the cost of building a new home. Now, that's not really a cost of living thing. That's a big investment decision. So that's not in the cost of living measures. And what they replace it with is the cost of repaying a mortgage, because that is a cost of living thing. So after all that talk, what it all boils down to is once you include mortgage repayments, cost of living is a heck of a lot higher. It's not a 2.8% increase in inflation. It's a 4.7 increase in employee cost of living.
So quite a bit higher than
quite a bit higher than wages,
increase,
quite a bit higher. So what that actually means is that if you're an employee and you got a wage, on average, your living standards, your real wage has gone backwards about 1.1% in the past year. And since 2021, since September 21, so basically 3 years, the past 3 years, if you take into account mortgage repayments, your living standards, your real wage has fallen about 9%.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
Now, to put that in context, back in September 2021, the average full-time wage was around $90,000. What that means is, in real terms, your wage now is equivalent to about $82,000. You've lost $8,000 worth of spending power.
God, when you put it like that,
When I put it like that, I'm the voice of doom and gloom, as I always am.
As you always are.
Yeah. So what it really highlights, though, the reason why cost of living has increased so much, especially over the past 2 years, is really interest rates. When you actually break down, and I did a bit of maths and looking at spreadsheets and everything, and you can actually work out what caused or what were the biggest drivers of that cost of living measure. And over the past 2 years, so since the Reserve Bank has started raising rates in May 2022, half of the increase in cost of living is basically interest rates.
Half.
Yeah.
That's, just from interest rates.
Just from interest rates. And also remember, that's the average.
Yeah.
So even with the employee cost of living measures, they're still just doing an average. So they're including people who don't own a mortgage and people who are renting and get a kind of an average. So if you are actually paying off a mortgage, it's probably more than that.
Yeah.
So the upshot is the official inflation rate is low, 2.8%. The underlying inflation rate, as we were talking about, I think last week, also low, 3.5%, pretty close to the RBA's target. We know people aren't spending. We know retail trade's doing it tough. Unemployment, fortunately, has stayed kind of okay, but it's kind of been trending up a little bit.
You did say the upshot at the beginning of this sentence, yeah?
Yeah. The economy's weak. We know GDP's been going backwards and everything once you take out population. So the upshot is, what the hell is the Reserve Bank waiting for? What are they looking at? They're going, oh, we're still a bit worried about inflation going too fast. We got to clamp down on it. It's like,
guys, it's not going to happen.
How about in December when you have your final meeting of the year, you go, you know what, I think everyone could do with an early Christmas present. Let's just cut rates 25 basis points. The world will not end, but it will give a signal that actually maybe you can relax a bit now where the bad times are behind us. You know, and if they're talking about Trump or things like that, I mean, come on. Again, it's 25 basis points. Just throw us a bone here. Throw us a freaking bone. Yeah. But especially because the Reserve Bank really worries about wages. Wage growth is the big thing, because if wages are rising fast, that forces companies to raise prices because they got to pay for their staff by selling stuff, and they might have to sell stuff that, at a high price to be able to pay for wages. And that's always the worry. But when wage growth is slowing, what the hell are you waiting for? Cut the damn rates.
All right. Well, looking forward to a nice early Christmas present from Michelle Bullock, please, and thank you. No, we're speaking it into the universe. And so, Greg, last week we did sort of purposefully avoid talking too much about Trump to sort of give people a bit of a break from the onslaught of think pieces and commentariat. But you'll have to forgive us, everyone. We're going to touch on it a little bit this week.
Joe Biden has run up record trade deficits, also known as losses, higher than any president in history by far.
You want to impose a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. How will you ensure that that doesn't drive prices even higher?
It's not going to drive them higher. It's just going to cost countries that have been ripping us off for years, like China and many others, in all fairness to China.
Australia is well placed and well prepared, but not immune from any escalation in trade tensions. The direct impact on Australia would be relatively mild. But the broader impact on our major trading partners and on the global trading system might be more significant. And in that regard, that is a little more concerning to us.
Now that Trump's in, it's been sort of generating a lot of discussion about what it could do to Australia and our economy. Our Federal Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, did have a little bit to say about this. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Yeah,
he came out, gave a speech this week, and I think it was a bit of a let's try and calm the waters a bit because obviously everyone's panicking. And if you've seen who Trump is appointing to things like Attorney General and Defense Secretary and things like that.
The DOJ department.
The DOJ, yeah. Yep. Keep panicking is probably a good bit of advice.
It's probably not good for the economy if everyone panics.
So Jim Chalmers came out and said, look, and his main focus was on the tariffs, which Donald Trump, throughout the election campaign, had said, I'm going to slap a 60% tariff on everything being imported from China, everything. And on all other nations, it's going to be between 10 and 20%. And this is generally regarded as being what we would call a recession-making move. And that might be being glass half full. So Chalmers came out and said, look, let's not panic, And to be honest, he's kind of right in one sense in that he was saying, don't panic because, one, even if he puts a 10 or 20% tariff on us, it's not going to be end of days for us because pretty much about 4 to 5% of all the stuff we export goes to the US, which is not, they're about the 6th or 7th biggest. But it's
good,
not, it's not going to kill us. It's going to hurt certain businesses more than others. Also, what we know from the last time Trump was in, when he was threatening to put a tariff on our steel and aluminium exports, we were able to negotiate a bit of a deal, a sweetheart deal with him. You know, you get Greg Norman in the door and play a round of golf, and who the hell knows with Trump. You know. But it's
not
sad
going to be
that
Kevin Rudd
it's
doing that
sad
this
that is
time.
probably not far from the actual truth.
Yeah.
Was that we got Greg? He's mates with Greg Norman. So clearly, Chalmers was saying, look, even if we get the tariffs, things aren't going to go to hell. But he also, though, was fairly clear that actually if the 60% tariff on China kicks in and China responds, which they probably would, we're already seeing signs that Mexico, for example, are going to respond with tariffs on the US if Trump goes through with it, which is actually going to hurt the US more than it would hurt Mexico if they get into a tariff war. Europe would probably not take kindly to being treated as a third-class citizen. So if that happens, then we are kind of in a bit of trouble. We can't escape it. 40% of the stuff that we export goes to China. A good chunk of other stuff goes to South Korea and Japan. They're also sort of our second and third major trading partners. So they are very exposed to China as well, especially South Korea, because they're right on the border. They do a lot of trade. So if China is hurt or China really starts going, fine, we're going to look inward because we've got a bloody big population. We don't need you. We're just going to focus on internal growth. That's not going to be good for us. The only sort of thing that might help is if China does do that, if they focus, right, we're going to keep our economy going through infrastructure, that would kind of be good because infrastructure needs a lot of iron ore and coal, and we give them a lot.
We got that.
So, look, it's, for me, the big worry really with Trump is when we're looking at his cabinet appointments, it seems like, yes, things are going to be as bad as expected, and he's kind of doing what he said he was going to do. Yeah, he was going, like, for example, he said he's going to dismantle the Department of Education. It seems like he's going to do it, which, again, you might think, oh, that's not going to affect us, and it will definitely hurt a lot of people in America because the Federal Department of Education, for example, does most of the funding for all special needs education and things like that. So it's going to hurt a lot of people. It's not something that you can just sort of joke off because it will actually affect real people. But things like that, and also getting Elon Musk in to slash government spending, the reality is if he does that, goes full austerity, the US economy is in deep trouble because we know from all history, whenever governments actually follow through on their austerity talk, such as when Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott actually followed through on austerity, economies suffer because government spending supports a lot of the economy.
Yep.
Most governments, and Reagan was a prime example, they talk big on austerity, and then when they get in, they tinker around a bit and actually spend a hell of a lot more. And unfortunately, a hell of a lot more often is on defense. But there is the risk that if Trump is actually stupid enough to think, oh, we can massively slash the government, and
I think he might.
I think
he is
sector.
stupid enough.
Yeah, then there's a real risk that America's economy, we're not worrying about inflation and prices rising from tariffs and things. We're worried about the fact that America's economy is crashing. And the problem is America is still the big dog in the world economy.
Unfortunately.
And it's pretty hard to avoid that, because even then it's we wouldn't be worried so much about the tariffs that are on China. It's just the fact that America's not buying a lot of stuff from China because they're broke, or everyone's, like we saw during the GFC, they stopped spending, and that affects China, that affects us. So it's all of that type of thing that is the worry for me. Again, it's still a bit of wait and see, but the early signs are not good.
The early signs of heading up a Department of Government Efficiency with 2 people.
Yeah, exactly. Which,
but it's also not a government department, is it?
No. Well, it's clearly not a government department because if it was, Musk and what's his name?
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy would actually have to get Senate approval, which they sure as heck do not. Not that they wouldn't get approved, but there'd be Democrat senators that would be able to ask them some fairly pointed questions that they would not want to answer.
Do you know how the government works?
Yeah, and I have
Yeah.
done some digging, and I found you've got investments in this,
Yeah.
Senate is very good at finding things that you've wanted to keep hidden. And also there would probably be some legalities in terms of conflicts of interest that they'd have to adhere to. Whereas if you set it off outside of that and just say, oh, no, it's an advisory, blah, blah.
Yeah, but we had to call it department so it could say Doge.
So we can make a lame joke. Yeah, I suspect that the one area that Elon Musk will not think is wasteful spending are any contracts that go to SpaceX, shall we say.
No.
So not good on that front. Wait and see on how it's all going to affect our economy and the world's economy. But again, not good early signs.
All right, well, I'll wait and see then, I guess, Craig. Just as a last thing, it's not really a economics question, but I really wanted to know your opinion as a social media influencer yourself.
And author.
Sorry, yes. Greg did write a book about social media called The Rise of the Fifth Estate. You should read it. What's also been dominating the headlines, which is quite impressive considering Trump just got elected, is the Labor government's proposed ban for social media for people under 16. What's going on there?
Look, it's really interesting for a government that has said that they're going to focus all out on cost of living, and they've seen what happened in the American election where cost of living was the number one issue. To decide to spend the last 2 weeks of Parliament essentially in a bit of a fight over banning social media for people under the age of 16. A weird tack where they've kind of been suckered into it a little bit. There's been a few things going on. The South Australian government was, in a sense, bringing this in and saying, we're going to go it alone. God knows how that would work in a borderless internet.
Yeah.
To say that you it's banned in South Australia, but if I travel there to Mildura, I'm not banned. It just kind of weird, but you could see politically it looked terrible. There were a few FM stations that were kind of ginning up Anthony Albanese to get on board. News Corp were getting on board, save our kids, get them out in the playground again.
Let them be kids.
Yeah, let them be kids. And I think it's they kind of are like, okay, let's do it. It kills it as a bit of an issue. And crucially, it's only going to come in if it all gets passed, and it probably will get passed because the opposition will vote with them. In fact, try and make it even more strenuous because it's the type of thing the Liberal Party loves. It's only going to come in after the election. And it'll be at that point that everyone will realise that what it would actually require is everyone, regardless of whether you're under 16 or not, to actually have to verify your age somehow officially to use Facebook, which is going to annoy the hell out of a lot of people. And let me tell you, I know there are a lot of older people who use Facebook, and a lot of them aren't all that tech savvy.
Yeah.
So all this talk about, we'll have some sort of ID.
That will definitely be secure.
It will be
don't
secure.
worry about uploading your data somewhere else.
Yeah, it's pretty much unworkable. And the reason why we know it's unworkable is because it hasn't happened anywhere else. People, every government, and in fact, even I have some friends who have worked for IT companies, major companies like Google and others, and said, look, they would have loved to have been able to do something like this because it kind of protects them, helps make their brand look a lot safer, which means advertisers are going to love it a lot more. And they're like, basically, it comes down to you have to provide some official ID, which is
like
a
birth
real
certificate or driver's license,
passport, real privacy concerns. And also, how do you verify that someone hasn't just got their dad's driver's license and have typed in the numbers or their credit card or whatever? And if you're like, oh, well, maybe we can get around that with facial ID. There's no privacy concerns there. No issues with racism and gender or anything like that. Look, I think what will happen from this, and I've already sort of seen this week as well, there's sort of talk about changing probably the Communications Act, looking at social media companies and giving them more duty of care, so that they are, if they want to operate in Australia, they need to conform to certain things. I would suspect it'll become something like you already have on Instagram now, where there are teenage sort of accounts. Like if you're a teenager, you're on this and you don't see stuff. And even on YouTube, there's YouTube...
YouTube Kids.
Well, not so much YouTube Kids, but there are videos that you have to actually register to see. You can't just go on YouTube and see, because it might have some adult content on there. And that's the whole weird thing about this thing is, like, for example, they've included YouTube, which it's not, it is a social media site, but not really, only because you can leave comments. You don't have to register.
I saw some other people saying, like, under the rules that they've given so far, like things like Xbox Live could be counted.
It is nuts, because what is a social media is extremely hard to actually pin down, especially because new ones are coming up all the time. They're changing things that weren't, or adapting, like all sort of Xbox games and things like that. You've got things like YouTube, which would be banned for under 16s on this, yet are used very much by schools as educational tools. They have a lot of really great explainer videos done by universities on there, great history resources. If you want to find footage of Martin Luther King giving a speech or something like that, it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Great resource. And also you've got kids who are already on YouTube, who've got their own channels, and like it might be just talking about video games. It might be they're creating their own little videos. They might just be talking about stuff, knickknacks, and they're actually earning money from doing this. They would be banned. And the great thing is, Parliament House now, if you go on the Parliament House website and click on watch this, you get taken to their YouTube channel. So kids would actually be banned from being able to watch Parliament on YouTube, which, okay, probably good.
No one needs to see that.
Probably not seeing Question Time would be good for mental health. There are also other things that you're seeing a lot of advocates talking about. This will help reduce teen suicide and everything. Like, yeah, but what about all those teens, especially we know LGBTI teens, who actually use social media to find people, to actually find a community that actually is incredibly helpful for their mental health, that actually prevents suicide. And instead, it's all talking about, bullying. It's like, yes, we know there's bullying. I've got a wife who's a teacher, and it's a thing that schools are very focused on. But we can't, it is the old trying to cure a headache by chopping off the head kind of thing. And it's unworkable. That's the other thing. So what I think the government is doing is going, this could have been a potentially politically hot thing where it looked like, we're not helping it, we're letting down our kids. Fine, we'll put something in place. It doesn't actually have to start working until after the election. And when we get there, we go, it's not really working, and it's not really, let's just, maybe they should all just have to offer a teenage service that you can opt into, and here's a whole lot more education and blah, 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 Hopefully that's it, because if it gets to the point where everyone is having to give Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or whoever your birth certificate, your driver's license.
I'll just use a VPN.
Well, see, this is what it comes down to, and this is why it's never worked, is you're saying we can't trust the social media companies because they are ruining our kids' lives. So let's give these social media companies all of our private details, and we will trust them not to abuse them. It's like, okay, there's a bit of logic that has fallen down there in a couple places. Have you joined those dots yet? When they do, I think everyone will go, like with a lot of these campaigns that we've seen over the time, there's a lot of noise. Something gets done, everyone declares victory and kind of forgets about it. And then 5-10 years' time, we go through another, let's save the kids.
Yeah. All right. Well, if ever there was a time to learn how to use a VPN, I guess now would be then. All right. That's probably about all we've got time for today, Greg. Thanks for indulging me on our little bit of non-economic discussion.
Well, I mean, given I haven't actually written a book on economics, but I have written a big book on social media.
Yeah, why are we doing this podcast about economics? Just talk about social media.
We finally got to my expertise.
Your real field of expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor. It was a really good chat. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week with another Dollars and Cents. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on the 14th of November, and some things may have changed. You can find my column with all the graphs looking at wages growth and our hit to real wages on the Grogonomics column on Guardian Australia site. And for more research, especially looking at how we really need to tackle cost of living, go to our website, which is at australiainstitute.org.au. And also just on cost of living, this week I've done a policy school on cost of living, on things that we can do to actually tackle the cost of living at the next election. The YouTube video of that, if you've missed the webinar, will be up on our YouTube channel later. My social media handle that I'm using very much at Blue Sky at the moment is @GrogsGamut, and Eleanor's is @Eleanor... Oh, wait, no, I can't read this.
@EleanorJ_L. I'm not on Blue Sky yet, but I
will
might
be
come,
soon. Get on Blue Sky.
Yeah, right.
Come on over to Blue Sky. The water is fine. Sing out if you join, and I will follow you. Our theme music, as always, is from Blue Dot Sessions. Everyone, have a lovely week, and we'll see you all next week.
See ya.